What if the most important strike of this war was not aimed at Iran at all? What if the target was not a military base, not a naval asset, not a nuclear facility, but a railway bridge in a province most people have never heard of? And what if that strike was not a message to Tehran, but to Beijing and Moscow? 3 days ago, the United States struck a railway bridge in Golestan province. That is in the northeast of Iran. That is 900 miles from the Gulf. 900 miles from where the actual fighting is happening. Why would you do that? Why would you go out of your way to hit a bridge that has nothing to do with naval operations? Nothing to do with the Strait of Hormuz? Nothing to do with the Iranian military that is actually shooting at you? The answer is this: that strike was not a message to Tehran. That strike was a message to Beijing and Moscow. And once you understand why, you will understand the real shape of this war. Let's start with the map. This is Iran. You have the Gulf in the south. You have the Strait of Hormuz here. This is where all the naval action is happening. This is where the tankers are. This is where the American Fifth Fleet is operating from Bahrain. Now look north. Look all the way north, past Tehran, past the Elburz Mountains, all the way to the northeastern corner of Iran. Right here. This is Golestan province. Golestan is interesting. It doesn't look like much on a map. It's not an oil region. It's not a military hub. It borders Turkmenistan to the north. In peacetime, most people have never heard of it. But there is one thing that runs through Golestan that makes it strategically critical. A railway line. This is not just any railway. This is part of what the world calls the International North-South Transport Corridor. Let's call it the Iron STC. And this corridor is one of the most important trade routes being built right now on the planet. Here's what it does. It connects the ports of India in the south, through Iran, up through Azerbaijan or Turkmenistan, and into Russia. From Russia, you can connect to China. And from the other direction, through Iran's eastern border, you can connect directly into Central Asia and into Western China. Iran is the spine of this entire corridor. Without Iran, the route does not work. Remove Iran from this map, and India cannot reach Russia by land. Russia cannot reach the Indian Ocean by land. And China's alternative overland access to the Middle East becomes much harder. So when the U.S. bombed the Golestan Bridge, they didn't just destroy a piece of infrastructure. They cut a nerve in a supply chain that 3 major powers are all depending on. And those 3 major powers are China, Russia, and India. That is why this strike was different. That is why it matters. Now let me explain China's stake in this, because it is critical. In 2021, China and Iran signed what they called the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement. A lot of media reported on this, but they mostly reported the dollar amount, which was $400 billion, and then moved on. That is the wrong way to look at it. What is this deal actually about? Here's how it works. Iran is sitting on the 3rd largest oil reserve in the world. It has been locked out of the global oil market for 45 years because of American sanctions. It cannot sell oil to Europe. It cannot sell oil to Japan. It cannot sell oil to South Korea. The Americans made sure of that. But it can sell oil to China. And China needs oil desperately. China is the largest oil importer in the world. It imports about 10 to 11 million barrels per day. Now the question is, where does that oil come from? And how does it get there? Right now, the majority of China's oil comes through the Strait of Malacca. This is a narrow passage between Malaysia and Indonesia. And the problem with the Strait of Malacca is this: the U.S. Navy controls it. In any conflict scenario with China, the Americans can theoretically block China's oil supply at the Strait of Malacca. China knows this. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. So what is China's solution? Overland routes. If you can get oil overland, through pipelines and through rail, from Iran and Central Asia into Western China, you bypass the Strait of Malacca entirely. The Americans cannot blockade a railway line. This is why the INSDC matters to China. This is why the rail corridor through Iran is strategic. And this is why the U.S. bombing of the Golestan Bridge is not a random infrastructure strike. It is a deliberate disruption of China's plan to reduce its dependence on American-controlled sea lanes. Now think about this from the American perspective. If you are the United States, and you are watching China build an overland oil supply that you cannot blockade, what do? You go to war in Iran. And while you are fighting Iran, you make sure that the infrastructure China needs gets destroyed in the process. That is what we are watching happen right now. The war in Iran is also a war against China's long-term energy independence. And China knows it. Now let's talk about Russia. Russia's stake in the INSTC is slightly different, but equally important. For Russia, This corridor is about trade survival. Since 2022, when the West imposed sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine war, Russia lost access to European markets. The Baltic Sea trade routes became difficult. Western ports refused Russian cargo. Russian banks work it off from SWIFT. So Russia needed to redirect its trade south, through the Caspian Sea, through Iran, to the Indian Ocean. That was the INSTC. That route allows Russian goods to reach India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East without going through any Western Midas-controlled choke point. Then in the other direction, it allows goods from those regions to come back into Russia. Iran is essential to this plan. Iran is not just a partner for Russia. Iran is the only available corridor that makes this alternative trade system work. So when the U.S. destroys Iranian rail infrastructure, it is also tightening the economic pressure on Russia. It is saying your escape from Western sanctions runs through Iran, and we are now systematically dismantling that escape route. This is what I mean when I say the goal list and bridge strike was a message to Moscow. Not a bomb. A message. The message is we can reach your alternative trade network. We can reach it from 900 miles away. And if we choose to, we can cut you off from it completely. Now what does Russia do with that message? That is the big question. Because Russia is already in a war in Ukraine. Russia is already under sanctions. Russia does not have unlimited capacity to open another front. But Russia also cannot afford to let Iran fall. Because if Iran falls and comes under a government friendly to the West, the INSTC is gone. Russia is fully encircled economically. That is an existential threat to Moscow. So we are watching a situation where the U.S. is using the Iran war to squeeze Russia without directly fighting Russia. That is sophisticated strategy. And it is working. Now I want to talk about what the Americans are actually doing here at a strategic level, because this is where it gets really interesting. In game theory, there's a concept called signaling. A signal is an action that carries a message beyond its immediate physical effect. When a country does something in war that seems disproportionate or strange, it is usually a signal. The physical effect of bombing the goal list and bridge is minor. Iran has other rail connections. The route can be rerouted, repaired over time. The bridge itself is not going to determine the outcome of this war, but the signal is enormous. Here is what the U.S. is signaling by hitting that bridge. Signal number one: we can reach anywhere in Iran. Not just the Gulf, not just the coast, not just military bases. We can reach a railway bridge in a province that borders Turkmenistan. We have total reach. There is no safe zone inside Iran. Signal number two: we understand your overland strategy. This is directed at China and Russia. We know what the INSTC is. We know what it means for your energy security and your trade independence. And we are telling you that we are willing to destroy it. Signal number three: the cost of protecting Iran is rising. Every week this war continues. The infrastructure that China and Russia were counting on gets damaged further. If you want to save the INSTC, you need to intervene. And intervening means entering a war with the United States. This is a strategy that forces China and Russia to make a decision. Do you intervene in Iran and risk direct conflict with the U.S., or do you stay out and watch your long-term strategic investment get destroyed, piece by piece? This is a game the Americans are playing. And it is not stupid. It is actually quite calculated. The bet is China and Russia will not intervene directly. They will protest. They will send weapons quietly. They will issue statements. But they will not commit troops or planes, because the cost of direct confrontation with the U.S. is too high. And if that bet is correct, then the Americans can continue destroying Iranian infrastructure, including the overland corridors, without triggering a wider war. At the end of this, they will have weakened Iran, damaged the INSTC, and set back China's energy diversification plan by years. That is the calculation. It might be wrong, but that is what they are doing. So what can China actually do? Option 1 is direct intervention. Fighter jets, naval assets, openly entering the war on the side of Iran. This is a nuclear option, not literally, but strategically. It means direct conflict with the U.S. China is not going to do this. China's economy is too dependent on access to global markets right now. A war with the United States would be devastating for China's own economy. Beijing is not ready for that fight yet. Option 2 is proxy support. China quietly sends Iran weapons, drone components, satellite intelligence, communications technology. This is already happening to some degree. The problem is it does not stop the bombing. It helps Iran fight longer, but it does not protect the rail infrastructure. Option 3 is economic pressure. China starts unwinding some of its U.S. Treasury holdings. It starts reducing dollar transactions. It pushes harder for yuan-denominated oil trade with other countries. This is the slow war. This does not save Iran in the short term, but it accelerates a long-term movement away from the dollar. Most likely, what happens is a combination of option 2 and option 3. China supports Iran quietly while accelerating its de-dollarization strategy globally. But here's the thing, none of these options actually saves the goal list and bridge. None of them immediately restores the I and SDC corridor. The physical damage is done. Every additional strike makes reconstruction more expensive and more distant. So in the short term, the U.S. strategy is working on China. It is forcing China into a reactive position. China is spending diplomatic energy managing this crisis rather than building the trade corridor it needs. That is a win for Washington. Not a permanent win, but a win in the current moment. Now pull back. Let's look at this from the highest level. What you are watching right now is not just a war in Iran. You are watching the United States attempting to rewrite the infrastructure of global trade before it loses the ability to do so. Here's what I mean. The American empire runs on two things: the dollar and the ability to control the world's key choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Panama Canal, the Baltic Sea. These choke points are where American power is enforced. For the past 10 years, China and Russia have been building overland alternatives to these choke points. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Iron to Sea, cross-border pipelines, digital payment systems to bypass SWIFT. The whole project of this decade for Beijing and Moscow has been to create a world where American choke points do not matter. Iran was a keystone of that project in the Middle East. The overland routes from Russia and Central Asia to the Indian Ocean do not work cleanly. China's western overland access to the Middle East is disrupted. By going to war in Iran, the United States is not just trying to remove a regional threat. It is trying to destroy the keystone before the arch is completed. If this works, the alternative trade architecture that China and Russia have been building gets delayed by a decade. The U.S. retains control of the choke points. The dollar remains the dominant currency of global trade. If it does not work, if Iran holds, if China and Russia find ways to keep the corridor alive, if the Islamic world unifies against American intentions, then the choke points lose their power, and the architecture of global trade shifts permanently. That is what this war is about at the deepest level. The goal list and bridge is one piece of that story, but it is a revealing piece, because it tells you that the Americans understand exactly what they are doing. They are not just fighting Iran, they are fighting the map of the future. So let me bring it back to the question I started with. Why did the U.S. bomb a railway bridge 900 miles from the Gulf? Because the Gulf is not the real target. The real target is the overland trade system that China and Russia have built with Iran at its center. The real message is not to Tehran. The real message is to Beijing and Moscow. And the real stakes of this war are not about nuclear weapons or oil prices, or even the survival of Iran as a government. The real stakes are about whether the United States can retain control of the systems that make American power work: the dollar, the choke points, and the ability to decide who trades with whom. That is what we are watching, and we are going to continue watching it very closely. If you want to understand the next move in this game, the one to watch is not Iran. Watch what China does with its dollar reserves in the next 60 days. That will tell you more than any military strike, because the real war is not over territory. It is over the architecture of global trade, and that architecture is being rewritten, one railway bridge at a time.